Good morning and welcome to today's Quarantine Quiet Time. It is October 26th. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard, there's an election coming up. I know. Surprised me too. It's like only a few days away, really. But I better find out a little bit more about these candidates. No, yeah, there's an election coming up. And the thing that in my neck of the woods, and probably yours as well, there's a lot of question of what is a Christian's responsibility with politics? How does our faith and politics relate? How do they intertwine? Should they intertwine? Should they affect one another? What's the relationship? Now, I'm not going to answer that question for you today. No, it seems like I would. That was the direction I was going. I'm pretty tricky that way. But no, I'm just introducing an amazing event that's really was kicked off this very question for Christians for the last 1,700 years. You see, something amazing happened on October 26th. 312 AD, and Christians and politics have not been the same since. So let's get into it today. Now, yes, 312 AD, this takes us actually back to the ancient Roman Empire. And now keep in mind, ancient Roman Empire, Christianity had not been real popular because it was seen as something that undermined the empire. If you believe your empire is only going to remain stable and flourish and prosper, if all your ancient gods are kept happy by people offering sacrifices and worshiping them, well, if this group of Christians are suddenly no longer worshiping those gods and ignoring all your ancient religious practices, they're going to appear as though they're undermining the worship of that God. And if that means that God's not going to be happy, if that God's not happy, your empire is going to start to fail. And so it became an outlawed practice to be a Christian. Persecution was all over the place and really reached its peak under Diocletian, the late 200s AD. But it didn't stay that way. Now there's a man that you and I both know is by the name of Constantine. Now Constantine, he was raised in the household, obviously, of his father. And his father was actually, believe it or not, the emperor of the western half of the Roman Empire. Now, just for just some ease of understanding, the empire had grown so large, actually, they decided to split it in half. There'd be two emperors, and each would handle one half of the empire. Because it becomes so large, it became too laborious for one individual to handle, they thought. And so Constantine's father was actually the emperor of the western half of that empire. But he died. His father died in 306 AD. And Constantine, who was beloved by his father's armies, was proclaimed emperor by his father's troops, emperor of that western half of the empire. But he was not the only one who had a say in this. In fact, there was a lot of different political influences in the ancient Roman world, and a big one at this point was what's called the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard originally was basically this elite group of soldiers whose job it was to guard the emperor. But over time, given their viciousness and their brute force, they were the elite soldiers. Well, they used that to their advantage, and they suddenly became a political influencer, oftentimes trying to select who the next emperor would be. In this case, they did. They selected a man by the name of Maxentius. Now, Maxentius, he was in Rome. And so it was an easy place for him to say, I am the emperor of the western half of the empire. And so, of course, this is ancient Rome, and this sets us on a collision course for battle and war between Constantine and Maxentius. And so it was on this date, on October 26, 312 AD, Constantine had marched his troops, and on this date, 312 AD, they came to rest just 5 miles north of Rome. They're going to do battle the next day with the forces of Maxentius. Now, there's a church historian at the time called Eusebius. Now, Eusebius, he writes very, very clearly of the events that happened following this. Now, Constantine swears to him that he saw in the evening sky a flaming cross appear, a cross like Jesus hung upon, and with the words from Christ saying this, in this sign, conquer. In other words, using the sign of Christ, the cross, you will conquer. And then he swears he had a dream that night when Jesus came to him. instructing him to tell his soldiers, commanding his soldiers, to put the letters Chi and Rho on their shields. Now, Chi and Rho are the first two letters of the Greek spelling of Christ. In other words, to put the letters of Christ upon their shields. Now, the next morning he gives this order and they do it. They do that. And meanwhile, back in Rome, you have Maxentius, the night before, basically engaged in all kinds of sacrifices, the ancient classic Roman gods, and doing all these divinations and whatnot. Basically, this battle is lining up and building up to be the battle between the army of Christ and the army of the ancient Roman gods. Now, Maxentius decided to do battle right in front of the Tiber River, with the Milvian Bridge directly behind him. And that's about 1 mile outside the gates of Rome. And this is actually a very bad choice, because if he should lose, Maxentius has nowhere to run. He's stuck. Well, according to Eusebius, Constantine advanced, invoking God and Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. And even though he was greatly outnumbered, Constantine won the day, and Maxentius, along with many of his troops, their bodies fell into the Tiber River as they were cut down. The next day, Maxentius' body was pulled out of the river, and Constantine entered Rome as the undisputed emperor of the western half of the empire. Now, the following year, Constantine met with the emperor of the eastern half of the empire, and he issued the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan granted Christians freedom to worship God. This was huge. Suddenly they went from being persecuted to an emperor conquering under the sign of Christ, putting the name of Christ on their shields, and now suddenly it's legal to worship. And more than this, Edict of Milan compensated them for everything that they had lost along the way, everything that had been taken away in arrests and basically legal fines, things of that nature. All those things were restored, and even more, all the church property that had been taken away was returned to them. This is huge. Edict of Milan opened things up amazingly for the church. Now, there was an uneasy peace between the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire until 323, when a great battle had broken out, basically a war between Constantine and Licinius, and Constantine beats Licinius. He defeats him in battle, and Constantine suddenly is the emperor of the entire Roman world. Now, he then moves the capital city from Rome to Constantinople, which was more central at that point and better for the place of trade and whatnot. But Constantine is probably most remembered for what he did with church policies. In addition to the Edict of Milan, he suddenly allowed the church bishops to have a more political civil role, as he let them settle civil lawsuits like judges. And he also closed the courts of law on Sunday, and actually all the workshops had to be closed on Sunday as well. He banned all the gladiatorial games. All these things, basically, while he's not making everyone be a Christian, he's sort of pressuring people to accept the faith of the Christians and their practices. Now, he even got involved in church affairs, which is something new in the life of the church. You never had an emperor involved really in deciding church issues, and there had been a big conflict as Christianity became far more popular across the empire. There's a lot of doctrinal disputes, and so he actually, as emperor, pulled together the Council of Nicaea, and there's about 300 plus delegates from all across the Roman Empire, and their job was to come up with a single solid statement of belief for Christians across the empire. And that was in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea. But there was still a dark side to Constantine as well. In 326, he had his wife and one of his sons executed under very suspicious circumstances. He also never gave up his role as the chief priest of the pagan state religion of Rome. As emperor, it was automatically bequeathed to him that he was the chief priest of the state religion, of the pagan state religion. He never gave that up. He never denounced it. And in fact, all the coins that he minted the entire time as emperor proclaimed his allegiance to the sun god. You know, and he put off being baptized until right before his death. So there's a lot of questions about was Constantine ever a Christian, or did he just manipulate the Christian system for his benefit? And so whatever his personal spiritual state, because of Constantine, Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire. And ever since then, we've struggled with this question of what's the relationship between our politics and our Christian faith. It all began on this date, October 26th, 312 AD. And no matter how you look at this, whether it's a blessing or a curse, it reminds me of the words from Romans 13:1, where we read this, all governments have been placed in power by God. This is an important thing for us as Christians to remember, especially as we go into this election time. Just remember that it's not simply, just a man-made thing in these elections. God is involved. God is the one who has been placing the government. And so for us, this is huge, and this is something more we can unpack at a later time. But today, I want you to pray with me for the upcoming election. All right? Our God in heaven, we know that you are intimately involved in the work of this world and the politics and the systems at hand. While we live in a broken world, that means no political system will be perfect, and no candidate will be perfect as well. But Lord, I pray that as Christians of every sort of political stripe, no doubt watching this, I pray that we can respect our president, that we can be engaged in the political process, and that as Christians, we remember that you are God above all. So we give our election to you, Lord, and in that, may we keep our civility and love and peace throughout this process. In Christ's name we pray, amen. Well, you go, have a great day, and just think about this. What is our role as Christians in our politics? Have a great day.